The boardroom door clicked shut just as my fingertips grazed the handle. Through the frosted glass, I could see 7 silhouettes settling into chairs around that polished conference table. My conference table. The one where I'd presented my prototype 18 months ago, my voice trembling with excitement as I showed them what 3 years of 18-hour days in my garage had created. "Oh, Kira." The voice behind me belonged to Broderick Hayes, the VP of Strategic Development. His tone carried that particular brand of corporate condescension that makes your skin crawl. "Sorry, but this is C-suite only. We're handling the client presentation internally." I turned around slowly, keeping my expression neutral even though something was dying inside my chest. "Of course," I said, forcing what I hoped looked like understanding. "I'll wait outside." The thing is, I'd built that technology from the ground up. Every algorithm, every interface, every breakthrough that made our system 30% faster than anything else on the market, that was me. When they acquired my startup for what seemed like life-changing money back then, I stayed on as what they called a senior consultant, a deliberately vague title that let me work in the shadows while they paraded around in suits, taking credit for innovation they couldn't even properly explain. But this wasn't just any client meeting. The $50 million contract they were about to discuss belonged to Elias Morton, the original investor who'd believed in my vision when everyone else called it impossible. The man who'd sat in my cramped garage office, drinking terrible coffee from mismatched mugs, while I walked him through wireframes sketched on napkins. "My name is Kira Thorne. I'm 28 years old, and until that moment, I thought I could stomach anything for the sake of financial security. I was wrong." Let me pause here for a moment. Before I go any further, could you take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're watching from? Because I want to know how far my story has reached people who might be going through something similar. And please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this one. Because what I'm about to tell you changed everything for me. And maybe it can help you too. The hallway felt endless as I walked away from that boardroom. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing like a countdown. I could hear muffled voices starting the presentation through the walls. They were using my slides, my research, my 3 years of failed experiments and breakthrough moments. They were selling my dreams to the one person who'd helped me build them. I made it to my office, a cramped space tucked away in the corner of the building, nothing like the windowed offices the executives occupied. I sat down at my desk and stared at the single photo I kept there. Me and my dad in his workshop when I was 12, both of us covered in grease, grinning over some broken engine we'd managed to fix together. He died before he could see what I'd built, but he always told me that the best revenge against people who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong, it's proving them irrelevant. For the first time in 18 months, I wasn't thinking about keeping my head down or playing it safe. I was thinking about that clause buried deep in my acquisition contract. The one my lawyer had insisted on, even when I thought it was unnecessary. The clause that said if I ever felt the company was misrepresenting or misusing my technology, I retained certain rights. The presentation lasted 2 hours. I know because I watched every executive file out of that boardroom with smug satisfaction written across their faces. Broderick even had the audacity to give me a thumbs up as he passed my office, like I should be grateful to have witnessed their success from the sidelines. That night, I went home to my apartment and pulled out a box I hadn't touched since the acquisition. Inside were all my original notebooks, prototype sketches, and correspondence with Elias from those early days. Every late-night brainstorming session we'd had was documented in handwritten notes and email chains. Every breakthrough moment was time-stamped and signed by both of us. But more importantly, I still had his personal phone number. I called him at 11 p.m., not through corporate channels, not through intermediaries, but direct. The way we used to talk when I was just a woman with an impossible idea and he was the only investor crazy enough to listen. "Kira?" His voice was surprised but warm. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. The presentation today was impressive, though I have to say, something felt off about it." My heart started racing. "What do you mean?" "Well," he paused, and I could picture him in his home office, probably wearing one of those worn sweaters he favored for evening calls. The team seemed to struggle with some of the technical details. When I asked about the original inspiration for the core algorithm, they gave me a lot of corporate speak, but no real story. You know how much I value understanding the human element behind innovation. This was it. This was the opening I needed, but I had to be careful. I couldn't sound bitter or vindictive. I had to sound professional, concerned, and most importantly, truthful. Elias, I said slowly, can I ask you something? Do you remember our conversation about intellectual integrity? The one we had in my garage about how the technology industry has a problem with people taking credit for work they didn't do? The silence on the other end stretched just long enough to make me nervous. I remember, he said finally. Kira, are you telling me something I need to know? Over the next hour, I walked him through everything, not with anger or accusations, but with documentation. I sent him photos of my original sketches, timestamps from my development logs, email chains between us from the early days. I showed him the acquisition contract clause about misrepresentation. I let the evidence speak for itself. The most beautiful part was that I didn't have to convince him of anything. He remembered our conversations, our collaborative development process, the way I could answer technical questions that stumped even my own hired developers. He'd always known the technology was mine, but he'd assumed the company was properly crediting me as the architect. Kira, he said when I finished, I want you to know that if this is accurate, and based on what I remember, I believe it is, then I cannot in good conscience proceed with this contract. More than that, I think we need to have a very different conversation about the future. What kind of conversation? The kind where I ask if you'd be interested in starting fresh, with proper funding, proper ownership, and proper recognition for your work. I've been looking for someone with your vision to lead a new initiative I've been planning. My hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. From possibility. I'd like to hear more about that. How about we meet tomorrow? Not in a corporate boardroom, but somewhere we can actually talk. I'll bring my development team leaders, the ones who handle technical due diligence. I want them to hear directly from the source about what makes this technology revolutionary. After we hung up, I sat in my living room for hours, staring at the city lights through my window. For the first time since the acquisition, I felt like myself again. Not like a consultant or an advisor or someone grateful for the opportunity to watch other people present her work. Like an innovator. Like someone with value that couldn't be replaced or replicated. The next morning, I arrived at work early. I needed to prepare for what was coming, but I also needed to gather additional evidence. I printed copies of every email, every development log, every timestamp that proved the timeline of my innovations. I documented every meeting where my ideas had been discussed, every presentation where my work had been featured without my name attached. Around 10 a.m., Broderick stopped by my office. He was practically glowing with self-satisfaction. Great news, Kira, he said, leaning against my doorframe like we were old friends. The client is moving forward with preliminary discussions. The team really knocked it out of the park yesterday. That's wonderful, I replied, keeping my voice level. I'm sure everyone worked very hard to make it successful. They did. You know, moments like these really show the value of having strong leadership to guide complex client relationships. It takes experience to handle deals of this magnitude. I nodded thoughtfully. Absolutely. Experience and credibility are everything in these situations. He left my office looking pleased with himself, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. At noon, my phone rang. It was Elias. Kira, I've made my decision. I'm withdrawing from negotiations with your current company immediately. Their representation of the technology was misleading at best, and I won't work with organizations that misappropriate intellectual contributions. I understand, I said, though my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice. But I have a proposition for you. I want to fund your new company, your technology, your leadership, your vision. I'm prepared to offer you initial funding of $15 million, with the potential for significantly more as you scale. You'd maintain majority ownership and complete creative control. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Elias, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Then say goodbye to people who don't value what you've built. Yes, I whispered. Absolutely yes. Excellent. I'm sending formal withdrawal documentation to your current company this afternoon. I expect they'll want to schedule some emergency meetings to discuss what went wrong. What went wrong? As if it was some mysterious corporate puzzle, instead of the predictable consequence of excluding the actual creator from discussions about her own work. Within an hour, the entire executive floor was in chaos. I could hear urgent conversations happening behind closed doors, phones ringing constantly, assistants hurrying between offices with stacks of papers. The $50 million deal that had seemed like a guaranteed win that morning was evaporating in real time. Broderick appeared in my doorway again, but this time his expression was completely different. The smugness was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. Kira, he said, stepping fully into my office and closing the door behind him. We need to talk. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding with the Morton Group. They're claiming there were misrepresentations in our presentation. That sounds serious, I said, turning away from my computer to face him directly. What kind of misrepresentations? They're asking questions about the original development team, the timeline of innovations, things like that. Very technical details that seem, I don't know, unnecessarily specific. I watched him struggle to find words that wouldn't admit what we both knew was true. Maybe they want to understand the technology better, I suggested. Some clients appreciate knowing the full story behind the innovations they're investing in. His face flushed slightly. Right. Well, the thing is, you were obviously very involved in the early development process. If they want to speak with someone who has that historical perspective, you might be the right person to have a conversation with them. Finally, after 18 months of being relegated to the shadows, they needed me front and center. I'd be happy to help, I said carefully, though I should mention that Elias Morton and I actually have quite a bit of history together. He was my original investor before the acquisition. The color drained from Broderick's face so quickly, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Your original investor? Oh yes. We worked together extensively during the early development phases. Very hands-on relationship. He's quite familiar with my role in creating the technology. Broderick left my office without another word. The afternoon brought a parade of executives to my door, each one more desperate than the last. First came Camille Sterling, the chief technology officer who'd never written a line of code in her life. Then Fletcher Morris, the VP of Innovation, who couldn't explain how innovation actually happened. One by one, they came to ask for my help in salvaging a deal that was falling apart because they'd excluded the one person who could actually answer the client's questions. But it was too late. By 5 p.m., Elias had sent formal documentation to the company's legal department, officially withdrawing from all negotiations and citing concerns about intellectual property misrepresentation. The letter specifically requested clarification about the original development team and asked for detailed documentation of each team member's contributions to the core technology. The executives had built their careers on taking credit for work they didn't understand, and now someone was asking them to prove their expertise. At 6 p.m., I submitted my resignation letter. Short, professional, and effective immediately. At 6:30, I walked out of that building for the last time, carrying nothing but my personal belongings and the satisfaction of knowing that everything was about to change. The phone calls started that evening. First Broderick, then Camille, then Fletcher. All of them wanting to discuss my departure and explore options for moving forward. All of them suddenly very interested in acknowledging my contributions and finding ways to properly credit my work. Too little, too late. The next morning, I woke up as the majority owner of a fully funded technology company with the backing of one of the most respected investors in the industry. The morning after that, I read in the business news that 7 executives from my former company had submitted their resignations following the collapse of their largest potential contract. The most beautiful part was that I never had to destroy them. I just had to let the truth surface. When someone asks you to prove you created something, and you can't, the conversation tends to end pretty quickly. The resignations made headlines in the tech industry. Not because of who these people were individually, but because 7 C-suite executives leaving the same company within 72 hours suggested something catastrophic had happened behind closed doors. I found out the details from Jasmine, my former cubicle neighbor who'd always been kind to me. She called me 3 days after I'd walked out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kira, what did you do?" she asked, but she wasn't accusatory. She sounded amazed. "I told the truth," I said. "That's all." Well, the truth just demolished the entire leadership structure. They called an emergency board meeting yesterday. Apparently, when Elias Morton withdrew from the deal, he didn't just leave quietly. He sent a detailed report to the board of directors explaining exactly why he couldn't work with a company that misrepresented intellectual property. My stomach fluttered, but not with anxiety this time, with vindication. Jasmine continued. The board demanded documentation proving who actually developed the core technology. When the executives couldn't provide it, they started pointing fingers at each other. Broderick threw Camille under the bus, saying she should have known the technical details. Camille blamed Fletcher for not maintaining proper development records. Fletcher claimed it was everyone else's responsibility to verify the information before client presentations. And none of them could actually explain how the technology worked, I said. Exactly. The board brought in independent technical reviewers to assess the situation. Guess whose name appeared on every single patent application, every development milestone, every breakthrough documentation? Mine. Because I'd been meticulous about documentation, even when I thought no one would ever need to verify my contributions. The board gave them a choice, Jasmine said. Resign quietly, or face a public investigation into intellectual property fraud. They all chose resignation. After that call, I sat in my new office, a bright windowed space in a building I'd chosen specifically because it felt nothing like my old workplace, and tried to process what had happened. 7 people who'd made my life miserable for 18 months had essentially erased themselves from my professional landscape. Not because I'd schemed or manipulated or destroyed them, but because they'd built their careers on a foundation that couldn't withstand basic scrutiny. The irony was staggering. They'd excluded me from the meeting because they thought I wasn't important enough to be there. But excluding the actual creator of the technology from discussions about that technology had exposed the fact that none of them understood what they were selling. My new company launched 6 weeks later. Elias had introduced me to a team of brilliant developers who actually wanted to understand my vision instead of just profiting from it. We called the company Apex Innovations, simple, direct, and completely owned by me. The first major client meeting was surreal. I sat at the head of a conference table in my own building, presenting technology I'd created to people who respected my expertise. When technical questions arose, I answered them myself instead of watching someone else stumble through explanations they didn't comprehend. But the real validation came 4 months later, when Elias brought me an opportunity that made my original $50 million deal look modest. Kira, he said during one of our weekly strategy meetings, I've been talking with some contacts in the aerospace industry. They're looking for exactly the kind of innovative approach you've developed, but they need someone who can scale it for much larger applications. How much larger? $200 million contract to start. Potential for expansion into international markets worth significantly more. I stared at him across the table, remembering all those months when I'd felt grateful just to have a job where I could work with my own technology. What's the timeline? I asked. They want to meet with you next month, just you. They specifically requested to work directly with the original innovator. The meeting took place in a conference room that overlooked the city skyline. As I presented my expanded vision for the technology, I kept thinking about that closed boardroom door from almost a year earlier. The click of that handle turning, the dismissive voice telling me I wasn't important enough to be included. This time, I was the only person in the room they wanted to hear from. The aerospace executives signed the contract that afternoon. 6 months later, my former company was acquired by a larger corporation for significantly less than its projected value. The loss of the Morton Group deal had triggered a cascade of problems, including investor confidence issues and client trust concerns. The business news articles mentioned that the company had experienced leadership instability and questions about intellectual property management. I learned about the acquisition from a LinkedIn notification. Several former colleagues had reached out to congratulate me on my new company's success, mentioning that they were looking for new opportunities since the acquisition meant layoffs were likely. But it was a message from an unexpected source that really caught my attention. Broderick Hayes had sent me a connection request with a personal note. Kira, I hope we can put the past behind us. I've learned a lot about the importance of proper attribution and would love to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. I stared at the message for a long time. This man had spent 18 months treating me like an inconvenient afterthought, had smirked when I was excluded from presenting my own work, had taken credit for innovations he couldn't even explain. Now he wanted to collaborate. I declined the connection request without responding. Some people think revenge means making your enemies suffer, but the most satisfying revenge is becoming so successful that your enemies become irrelevant. Broderick wasn't my problem anymore. He was just someone I used to work with who'd made some poor choices. My company now employs 43 people, all of them properly credited for their contributions. We have contracts worth over $600 million, and 3 of our innovations have been licensed by companies in 12 different countries. I own 78% of a business that industry analysts value at nearly $500 million. More importantly, I wake up every morning excited about the work I'm doing instead of dreading another day of watching other people present my ideas. The technology that started in my garage has evolved into something I never could have imagined. We're developing applications for renewable energy, medical devices, and space exploration. Last month, I gave a keynote speech at the International Innovation Conference, where I talked about the importance of intellectual integrity and supporting original thinkers. After my presentation, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She told me she'd been working at a company where her male colleagues consistently took credit for her research, and she'd been considering leaving the field entirely. "Your story gave me hope," she said. "It showed me that the truth has power, even when it takes time to surface." I gave her my contact information and told her about the mentorship program we'd started at Apex Innovations. 3 months later, she joined our team as a research director. That's the thing about authentic success. It creates opportunities to lift other people up instead of just climbing over them. Sometimes I drive past my old office building. It's been mostly empty since the acquisition, with only a few departments remaining before the full consolidation happens. The parking lot where I used to sit in my car, psyching myself up for another day of invisibility, now has weeds growing through the asphalt cracks. But I don't feel vindictive when I see it. I feel grateful. Those 18 months of frustration and exclusion taught me exactly what kind of leader I didn't want to become. They showed me the difference between authority based on position and authority based on competence. Most importantly, they proved that you don't have to destroy people who underestimate you. You just have to build something so undeniably excellent that their opinions become meaningless. The last I heard, Broderick was working as a consultant for small tech startups, helping them optimize their leadership structures. Camille took a position at a mid-level company doing project management. Fletcher moved into sales, where his lack of technical knowledge was less of a liability. They all landed somewhere. That's the thing about the corporate world. There's always another position for people who are good at managing without creating. But there's only one person who can claim to have built what I built, and that person is me. Looking back, I realized that the moment they closed that boardroom door, they didn't just exclude me from a meeting, they freed me from the illusion that I needed their approval to succeed. They forced me to remember that I'd built something valuable, not because of their guidance, but in spite of their interference. The girl who spent 3 years in a garage, surviving on determination and terrible coffee, didn't need permission to be brilliant. She just needed the courage to stop asking for it. If you're watching this and you're in a situation where people are taking credit for your work, or excluding you from opportunities you've earned, or making you feel like you should be grateful just to be in the room, listen to me carefully. Your value doesn't decrease because someone fails to recognize it. Your contributions don't become less significant because someone else presents them. Document everything. Keep records. Maintain relationships with people who understand your actual capabilities. And never let anyone convince you that being overlooked is the same as being unimportant. The truth has a way of surfacing. especially in our connected world where intellectual property and original contributions can be verified. People who build careers on other people's work are building on sand. Eventually, someone's going to ask them to prove what they claim to know, and that's when their foundation crumbles. Your job isn't to destroy them. Your job is to build something so authentic and excellent that when that moment comes, you're ready to show the world what you're actually capable of. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you're building, what you're fighting for, or what truth you're ready to let surface. Subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to stay invisible, because these stories matter. They remind us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stop waiting for permission and start believing in their own value. The world needs what you've created. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.